Oh, Nakai, you're not actually completely terrible, you're just perhaps a little bit overpriced, and if I were given the power, I would also make a couple of other changes to Nakai, but we'll talk more about that in just a minute here. The replay from Flying Taco was chasing a bounty on Rubber Duck of War's channel. He's recently been doing like a bounty series where he posts a challenge on his Discord, and then a bunch of people try and fulfill it. I believe this one was just getting the most damage value on Nakai, so here is one of Flying Taco's attempt. He's up against Tomb Kings. We've got Cetra on a chariot, Necrotect also on a chariot, Sphinx of Usek. We've got, Casket of Souls, Eyes of the Desert, a bunch of skeleton warriors, and yeah, skeleton spearmen. On Lizardmen's side, we've got a bunch of skinks, chameleon skinks, Manticore summon already been popped by the skink priest, Lore of Beasts, couple of feral Bastillodons, feral cold ones, so a little bit of armor piercing, couple of Temple Guard, plus some Saurus warriors, for a nice backbone. And of course, Nakai himself, along with Saurus Scarvet on foot. Great choice against the Tomb Kings. So yeah, Nakai, pretty decent character all around. He's got kind of okay combat stats. Actually quite good melee attack at 60 melee attack. Really good weapon strength as well for, just a generic melee character with no mounts. Great armor piercing damage. 32 charge, not too bad as well. 50 speed's okay. 120 armor. It's kind of all around pretty decent. More than 5,000 HP is pretty solid as well. All of that is good, but his biggest issue is just that in comparison to other similar type kind of monstrous infantry lords, he does fall short in terms of cost effectiveness. It's got him kitted out here though. Perfect Vigor is really good, especially in an AoE. Can potentially be very strong if Nakai can survive into the late game. He's also got this Primal Roar to give physical resistance and melee attack in an AoE. Again, on paper, this ability can be very strong, but it also gives Rampage, which is a bit of an issue, but that plus 40 melee attack is quite good, given that Lizardmen generally don't have great melee attack on a lot of their units, especially like their infantry, for example. Saurus warriors, you can see there, especially from that little debuff from the Necrotect, I believe, their melee attack down to only 20, but they do have very good weapon strength, so if you can increase their melee attack through buffs, they'll trade very cost effectively. In general, though, here he's going to run up against the Sphinx of Usek. Definitely not great, but thankfully he's got his trusty Saurus Scarvet bro nearby. Incantation of Desiccation being popped, and Nakai at least can pull away from that engagement there. Try and find a good spot. Now going after Cetra directly. Nice charge with the charge bonus, and Primal Roar also activates here. Let's see, what else did it hit? It did hit the Saurus Scarvet. Did not hit this Feral Bastillodon, I don't think, but you can see already the vigor difference. Cetra is drained already in terms of vigor, and of course Nakai and everything around will be staying at that perfect vigor, which is quite nice. Taking kind of an overarching look here, Taco's been able to get into the backline somewhat. The Casket of Souls is still online and firing, which could potentially be an issue. It's done a lot of damage to these Temple Guard. One of the Temple Guard, though, sweeping up and around the flank here with some Saurus, kind of grinding down some of those skeletons. Back in the pitched main center fight here, Sphinx of Usek just getting focused by chameleons very heavily here. Big old target, and chameleons do enough armor piercing damage that it's definitely very painful. Second summon Manticore also online, and Nakai now has a sight set on Cetra, who's being blocked in here by the Feral Bastillodon, who is routed technically, but still, Cetra definitely will take quite a bit of damage from Nakai in sustained fighting. That awesome weapon strength of Nakai's gonna serve him well in that particular engagement. Skink Priest kind of whittling away some Skeleton Warriors. Now the Saurus and Temple Guard start to push downhill against the Tomb Guard. I guess, is this slightly uphill and then over the ridge and then back downhill? Sphinx manages to disengage, kind of reacquire its bearings here, maybe get a little bit of healing from the Necrotech, stabilize leadership. Now going to try and protect the Casket of Souls, which has racked up 94 kills, quite a bit of value there, I'm sure. Nice charge into the Temple Guard, but at the same time, that Necrotech now going to go down to the Manticores and the Temple Guard. Temple Guard, I do need to do a video about at some point. Are a great elite halberd unit in terms of mass. I think they might actually have the best mass of any elite halberd, which is definitely something that is beneficial for elite halberds trying to stop up, monsters and cavalry and chariots and whatever else. Anyway, Manticore goes down there. Meanwhile, Nakai's been fighting over here just in this blob of skeletons. He gets punted by the Sphinx. Nakai does tend to get knocked around a little bit. Not quite as bad as Gorbel, but he does suffer a similar type of problem. Has probably my favorite charge animation in the game. One of them, at least. Just looks like he's having a grand old time. Punches a bunch of skeletons directly in the face. And his armor will definitely come in handy against these kind of low-tier skeleton troops. You can see a massive splash attack there. And also the Sphinx does crumble while he's nearby. Pops that Primal Roar once again. Juices up the melee attack of all these units in that tight little pocket. Does wear off relatively quickly. But a big old damage spike from him. Actually, one of the better support abilities for Lizardmen. Again, if it doesn't have the Rampage, might arguably make Nakai actually meta, but that Rampage effect does put into some consideration, you know, when you'll be using that and who is in that area of effect. Like, you don't obviously want caster in that area of effect if they're, like, trying to cast a spell or something. But Cetra just rolling away, trying to get away from Nakai as he just has a grand old time swinging his giant lollipop and bopping. Cetra on the back of the head, just trying to dismantle his chariot with his big old Croxagore hands. Nakai is a big boy. That is one thing he's got going for him. Cetra doesn't want any part of that, so he's going to nope out of there. Eyes of the Desert getting dragged down by the Temple Guard. Or Saurus Warriors, rather. Temple Guard trading well into their Tomb Guard counterparts. Definitely just a stronger unit overall in terms of stats and everything. And yeah, Cetra manages to mostly escape. You can see Nakai's just staying in his charge animation, though. Just I don't even know. Yeah, as this mace kind of clips through the ground there. Just having a grand old time, more or less, is what I'm trying to say here. Frolicking is what he's really looks like he's doing. But Cetra eventually goes down to crumbling. That's going to be army losses. And for Nakai, definitely a very solid showing. Pays for himself in terms of his damage output, 2,500 damage, 8,500 damage dealt, 2,500 damage value rather, and a lot of that coming against Cetra and the Sphinx, which is quite nice, but also doing some good kind of splash damage against infantry as well. He does, I need to review his splash attack profile, I don't remember 100%, but I want to say he has a good number of splash attack targets, makes him okay at clearing chaff. Biggest thing again is just his cost, and we'll take a look at that in just a minute here. Definitely Skink. Lore Beast with the Manticore summons, though, absolutely awesome. Saurus Scarvet also very well pays for himself on foot. He's a great add against the Tomb Kings in most Lizardmen builds. The Temple Guard, one of them getting absolutely canned by the Casket of Souls, which generated some really nice value. The other Temple Guard, though, does grind through and pay for itself. Kind of same story with the Saurus. Not quite so much damage output there, but Chameleon Skinks also very nice job overwatching the Sphinx of Usek there. Not really sure what happened to these clever girls. Maybe they got forgotten about. That's fine. Stillanon's also kind of just tanking damage more than anything. They're relatively cheap, and they do take quite a bit of resources to take down, so can help distract fire from more important targets, like, say, Nakai. Cetra, getting some decent value, but given how expensive he is, you probably want a little bit more out of him. The skeletons mostly just get absolutely crumped, as do the Temple Guard. And even the Sphinx of Usek having a hard time generating some good value there. But definitely the Casket was a bright spot for the Tomb Kings. In kind of review, there's a few monstrous infantry type lords. And Nakai is in an interesting place. And I want to say he's the most heavily armored of any of them. So we can think of other units. Probably Orion is arguably, well, maybe not arguably, he definitely is the best unit in this classification. You've got various other heroes, but in terms of like legendary lords, Throg is another one for Norsket that again you don't see him super often. He's definitely okay, but just stripping everything in terms of abilities from these three, and we can kind of compare their base cost and stats with no abilities whatsoever. You'll see that Nakai is actually, if I'm not mistaken, the most expensive of the three. So 1,650 for Nakai, only 1,600 for Orion and for Throg. So already he's seeming a little bit, just that much more slightly overpriced in comparison to these two. You compare him to Orion. Orion picks up quite a bit of benefit. Unbreakable is obviously massive. He also causes terror, which is, again, huge. He's got Vanguard. Woodsman has a ranged attack, which is pretty hefty. 12 ammunition, 445 overall weapon damage, over 10 seconds. 250 armor piercing with 70 base missile damage on each throw, which is quite good. Weapon strength is a little bit lower than the Kai overall, but it's got plus 15 bonus versus large to help even that out ever so slightly. Orion's got 5 more melee attacks, same melee defense. Orion's slightly faster. You don't have any armor on Orion, but he's got physical resistance, and also has item that can potentially provide lots of self-healing and extra damage resistance, which we'll get into that in just a minute. But yeah, Throg also, again, self-healing, anti-large, lower weapon strength overall, but similar stat profile in terms of attack and defense, much lower armor, also weak to fire because of that regeneration, but Throg, much higher charge bonus at 50. And yeah, also has Frostbite, which helps slow units down, not to mention he is that much faster than Nakai as well, so he can kind of keep targets within range, which is something that Nakai will definitely struggle with. And just in comparison to these three, I would say in terms of abilities, Miasma of Despair is okay. I mean, negative leadership can be decent against low leadership factions, minus speed as well. Again, kind of helps him catch units, but it's more on demand than the Frostbite. Only lasts for 16 seconds. You compare this to something like Mither even, and I know we're now switching to a hero and a non-legendary one at that, but it is kind of another monstrous infantry character, right? Caster, but Mither, just compare this, like, yeah, it's only speed here, but it is very considerable amount of speed. Again, only lasts 15 seconds, but castable at a range, whereas this, I believe, is only around Nakai, so there's some limitations in how it's utilized there. Primal Roar, definitely very solid, only lasts 17 seconds, which is, again, very short duration. Increasing the duration on this would definitely make it more worthwhile. It is a relatively expensive ability to bring at 230 points. Could be a lot better than it is. Looks nice on paper, but that short duration really limits its usage. Probably his best item and attribute is this one right here, Perfect Vigor, which you guys have heard me talk about a little bit recently, how powerful this can be. The issue you run into with Nakai is because he doesn't have any self-healing, he's got a decent HP pool, but again, in comparison to these other two, it's like other two, he's got less overall HP than Throg and no self-healing. And again, like similar amount of HP to Orion, but no self-healing. So you're going to get less value from this than you perhaps should. I mean, yes, you technically can take Rev Crystal, but the healing output on Rev Crystals is really relatively low. You kind of have to get all the casts over the course of a long battle. I mean, 624 is okay, but it's not anything to write home about, certainly, especially when there's a 60-second cooldown on this. You've only got 7 charges of it, so in theory, you can get a lot of value from that, perhaps healing Nakai, but again, it's a little bit of a weird investment to take this 1,000 gold unit that's otherwise not going to output much damage besides that, right? So there's that to consider. Yeah, in like actual usage, I usually don't even take Primal Roar, even though on paper it's great. The uptime of it being relatively short, plus the Rampage makes it kind of clunky to use. Not really that big of a fan of it, but what could you do to buff Nakai? Oh, there's a few things. Number one is reduce his cost, and even just reducing his cost by, 100 points, 200 points would definitely make a massive difference in cost effectiveness. Likewise, retooling this ability so that it perhaps has a longer uptime would definitely make it a lot more worthwhile, and it would make Nakai actually a much better support lord in some circumstances than, say, your generic Source Old Blood or Crocscore Ancient, which are definitely better support lords, given that they have Horn of Kygor, which is an awesome item. Another thing would be to give Nakai Vanguard. I want to say I'm no expert on tabletops, so don't quote me on this, but I want to say he has a similar rule to some other characters that have been given Vanguard. I also think it'd be kind of fun, fit his theme of just showing up in random places and helping out, and I mean, he's a wanderer, so why don't you let him wander a little bit outside of his deployment zone? Would help give him some unique flavors, certainly. And actually, this is kind of a side tangent, but I do think, like, most of the Skink units also that don't have Vanguard, like Skink Cohort and Red Crest especially, could also be given Vanguard. And I don't know, maybe even in campaign, I could give his Croc scores and his army Vanguard as well. Just be a kind of a little fun addition there. But yeah, that's mostly it for today, I guess. Yeah, just please, a small buff for Nakai would really help him out. Honestly, one of my favorite lords aesthetically in the game in terms of his animations. He just looks like he's having such a good time out there. It's hard not to love him. Hopefully you guys enjoyed watching this one. If you like this sort of content, be sure to like, subscribe, hit that bell notification. Every time I upload a new video, you'll be notified. Thanks again. We'll see you next time.